Well, hello there, and welcome back to Fabulous Folklore Presents. This time, I'm delighted to be talking to Darragh Mason, a multi-award winning photographer, author, and researcher. He studied photography at Dublin City University and has travelled extensively across Asia, Europe, and America, where he has written articles and published his photography. His work has taken him to post-war countries such as Bosnia and Herzegovina and Kosovo. Dara is particularly renowned for his photographic work on the Aghori Hindu sect and his research on the Djinn. Now, Dara also hosts an award nominated podcast, Spirit Box, which explores topics of folklore, magic, and the spirit world. And beyond photography, he is the co creator of the Sigil Engine, a technomantic art project. His book, Song of the Dark Man, Father of Witches, Lord of the Crossroads, delves into the Dark Man as a devil like figure in folklore and magic, exploring his role as a trickster, initiatory guide of witches, and creative force. So, in this chat, we're going to talk about the Dark Man as a concept, discuss his role in initiatory tales, have a look at exactly some of the tales that he pops up in, and also get into the idea of folklore as a continuum rather than just something that happened in the past. And there's a bonus rant about AI that was completely unexpected, but I rather enjoyed it all the same. So I hope you enjoy this episode, and all the links and everything that you'll need are in the show notes below. So enjoy. Welcome to Fabulous Folklore. How are you doing?
I'm great. Lovely to be here. Lovely to
It's
be here. Thank you for asking me.
lovely to have you. We'll just jump straight in because that's how these things work. You've written the book, and I've got it here quite helpfully with that fabulous cover, Song of the Dark Man, Father of Witches, Lord of the Crossroads. So, how would you describe the Dark Man as a concept for someone who's maybe
Mm.
new to him or how it's described?
Um, it's I was joking about this the other day. I was saying that I should be able to really answer this succinctly, given that I've written a book about it. But it's still bloody hard. It's an inspirational, disruptive force. Um, there's no singular name or form. Um, and there's many kind of shared kind of characteristics and mythologies. Um, how I've kind of described it in the book is really as an identifiable pattern, because it's so elusive. But like the names and avatars of this figure, archetype, energy, current, spirit would be very familiar to people. The devil being one, um, and like the the dark man is this particular appellation, a motif that I kept finding in folklore. And the character was very interesting in terms of how it drove narrative and change and transformation through through this through this type of disruption or kind of like interrupting people's lives or orthodoxy or upsetting the apple cart on kind of multiple levels. Um, so that's kind of how I would describe it. But that pattern is probably the best place to start. Is the dark name, appearance, or appellation. You know, the shape shifting, the interrupted journeys. This thing we have in folklore of, like, the kind of the fairy time type thing of like someone stops their journey, sleeps under a tree, and wakes up and it's 300 years later. That kind of thing. Um, there is this appearance as a composite being where it presents as being part animal, horned, famously. And then there is sexuality and sexual interest in human beings. And a bit I'd probably add on to the end of that is human hybridism. So humans being the stories that orbit him will often have, he may represent that human animal hybrid or human something else. No, notably, I talk about half fairy, half human in the book. But I, the names you would recognize are things like, Gwyn ap Nudd, or the Dark Rider in Gaelic, the Fardov, or on Fardurka, um, and you know things like those kind of fallen angel type figures, those adversarial figures of like Lucifer, Samiel, and what have you. Um, that's how I would kind of try and orient people into recognizing what the dark man is, you know, because it kind of like, as I kind of say in the book, who is the wrong question. There's no center, or at least if there is, it's not ascertainable by human beings. Not yet, anyway. We haven't seen that, but
So
um,
this is probably a horrible question, but off the back of that, what would
yeah.
be a good example of a tale featuring the Dark Man? Like, would there be a really famous one that you could point to and people would be like, "Oh my God, I know what that story is."
I mean, in terms of I think a really famous one. There's lots, when I think one of the things to think about here, and I talk about it in the book, is the dark man as a kind of a motif, or a current, as I kind of describe it in the book, plays out through our creativity, right? When we talk about kind of like the whole Robert Johnson getting his guitar tuned by the dark man at the Crossroads, and then kind of his career goes astronomical, and his influence on the kind of the musical world. We have the same thing in our stories, and I really think that the dark man is connected to the storyteller as much as there kind of is a direct influence on kind of like witchcraft and witch culture, and we see that in the documented confessions of British witches, particularly Scottish. Um, and storyteller too is somehow kind of intertwined with the dark man and its motifs, you know. And I say that prominently because I first saw him through the stories rather than through the kind of the witchcraft. So like it was through the aperture of folklore that I first started kind of seeing this. So yes, there's tons of stories. It's a very long answer to say yes. There's lots of stories, but one of my favorite ones is the story of Jemmy Nolan, um, folkloric story from Ireland. And Jemmy Nolan is this kind of his young buck. He's a young lad and he's off to the cattle mart to sell his cows. And on the way there, he's kind of ticking over in his head what he's going to do with the money he gets from his cows. And it's all the kind of concerns of like you would expect from a young guy. He's like, I want to get some nice clothes. I want to try and impress the girls at the market. I'm going to try and dance with all the girls. And like, just basically that's it, right? Um, anyway, he takes a break and kind of falls asleep under a tree. You were like, mistake number one. And when he wakes up, he's standing over him is um this what he assumes is a lord, but he's dressed kind of head to toe in black. These motifs will change a little bit from variations of the story. You'll often have a black horse, and then in the really kind of diabolical versions, that the horse's eyes are glowing red and all that kind of stuff. But essentially, the Lord invites him to his manor, and I'm having some festivities. Why don't you come? And he's, oh, okay, well, I'll come with you. This can't believe his luck, and he gets to the manor house, and it's very regal, and it's describing all the trappings of kind of like the wealth of the gentry, and again, one of the things that's really important when we kind of reflect on these stories is remember where these are being told. They're being told in crofts and like sod houses, of immensely poor people, living on the periphery of Western Europe, hanging on by a fingernail, like really in subsistence. And they're talking about this like immense wealth that Jemmy Nolan's been exposed to. And he's like, there's all these lords and ladies in their finery and the crystal glasses and wine and exotic fruit and all this kind of stuff. So it's all that splendor, and he has a wonderful time. And they give him one of the details of the story is they give him a red velvet suit, and he's thrilled with this red velvet suit. He's kind of funny, and he dances with the ladies of the manor, and then eventually the music stops, dead stops, and he's brought before the Lord, and the court all stop, all the murmur, all the sound, everything stops, and the Lord asks him, "Do you have a story to tell, Jemmy Nolan?" So the story to tell is that bit of like entertain us, right? And that's the people who are listening to the story understand that dynamic. Well, there's something else to the story, something else to that question. And Jemmy's like, I don't have a story to tell, right? And what that's hinting at is that Jemmy has no depth, right? Jemmy has nothing of meaning to talk about, and it hints at all the kind of superficial things that he's been thinking about on the way to the market and partaking in the manor house. He's been given everything that he was looking for, in the build up in the story, and immediately he's grabbed by the fairy henchman, because the Lord he's outraged with this. It's like, coming to my house and have no story to tell, get rid of him. And he's dragged out through the briar, out of the house, through the briar, and try as he might, he can't break the grip of these men. And there's a grave, and they throw him into the grave. And as he falls into the grave, and he's fighting for his life, but they're just too strong, he manages to grab a bit of hazel from the hedge and snaps it, and he uses that hazel stick to kind of to beat away the fairymen. And that wood has the qualities where it can kind of break those fairy spells. So he escapes, and they take him back to the manor, right? And he's asked again by the Lord, the Dark Man, "Do you have a story to tell?" And he's like, "Yes, I have a story to tell." I shouldn't laugh at, like, because I just think kind of it feels, that kind of dynamic feels a bit funny. Like, yeah, Christ, I have a story to tell. Let's not that happen again. But what the deeper meaning is that everything he's wanted, he got. He didn't have any reflection on it, and then he has everything taken away from him. So you're going to die. You've got seconds left, and he's in that pure moment. He realizes actually what does have meaning for him, and that's that kind of transformation through a traumatic event, through that kind of otherworldly journey, totally upends Jemmy Nolan's understanding of the world and what's important to him, and it's an ordeal. Right? And then he wakes up under the tree, and he's missed the mark. He's too late, right? So he has that loss in real life as well, but it all happened in this dream / fairyland. So we see a couple of interesting things in the stories about the Dark Man. And looking at that one in particular, is that he is essentially king of the fairies in this one. And often we see that happen quite frequently, that he's referred to as king of the fairies. He's also referred to as Lord of the Dead. He's also referred to as the folk devil. Hence there's no center, and these overlapping motifs and big folkloric characters where he crosses those boundaries with ease, and unsurprisingly, he's a psychopomp. Like, so it's kind of no wonder he can cross his boundaries with ease.
So could any sort of malicious or mysterious male figure in folklore be considered as a manifestation of the dark man, or does there need to be something sort of specific, like some ineffable spark that makes it the
Mm.
dark man rather than just a bit of a wrong'un?
Yeah, it's a great question. Um, and it's one I've had to ask myself as well. Like, being kind of like in that mindset to get out that kind of book and get out the kind of like um my thoughts on it. You really have to kind of measure your own response to it. So you're like, well, is everything the dark man? And then you have to kind of really kind of maintain some kind of mental discipline in that. And I think there are some quite definable features that allow us to kind of separate things, and it really comes down to that kind of pattern that I kind of outlined, but the biggest ones at the start, the biggest ones that I noticed, what was the kind of the dark name, the appellation, um, that disruptor, but also the initiation into magic. Right. So when we get into the Scottish witch trials, it's not universal by any shape or form, but it's pretty consistent. I would say kind of, there's 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 dozens of entries in like the Scottish Witchcraft Survey, Scottish Witchcraft Trial Survey, the database. I can't remember the actual name of it, but there's dozens of entries to this black figure, a man in black, a man with black clothes and hooven feet, you know, would be part of this confession. And interestingly, he'd be described sometimes as the king of the fairies. So there is an overlap there that was consistent. So I think there is a consistent pattern that separates it, but I also think what we're talking about is a type, a category of spirit, you know, um, with multiple types of emanations, you know, um, that are discernible, but perhaps it's part of the same thing. And that's why I talk about kind of like names and avatars, because they may actually be separate, but emanations of the same thing. If we're looking at it from an esoteric point of view. Um, but broadly speaking, it's what's the separation between the demon and the devil? They may both be devils, but one is the devil. I think that's the kind of territory you're looking at.
Mm-hmm.
And there's certainly from a witchcraft perspective, like the witch Robin Artisan talks about, there'll be Saturnian dark man, Mercurial dark man, and will have different characteristics, but they're still the dark man.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of a mercurial dark man, obviously Mercury being probably one of my favorite incarnations, I guess, of the trickster.
Yeah.
Is it that initiatory aspect of the dark man that separates him from just other types of tricksters? Because there's quite a lot of those in folklore, and I had Shepherd Sigil on talking about the trickster as an
Yeah.
archetype. So
Yeah.
is it the fact that they sometimes a bit like Loki just upset the apple cart for fun, whereas the
Yeah.
dark man's actually got a reason for what he's doing?
Well, I think so. And it's one of those things where unpacking that reason is probably a fool's errand. We don't have the cognitive capacity of a cosmic force, but it's it certainly seems to be a significant differentiator that um, this initiatory force has a prevalence that is frankly staggering. Like I didn't expect it to be that robust, and I've numerous accounts now of people who have had that kind of initiatory experience Again, sometimes in the composite form, sometimes in the jet black starry body, all that kind of stuff. So I would say the differentiating factor is that the magical element to it.
It does make me wonder, what is his end game? Like, why
Yeah,
initiate all these people into being able to
yeah.
do magic?
I mean, I think at the probably the most transparent aspect of it is the propagation of witchcraft, and developing those currents and you know belief patterns. You know, like I mean, I go kind of all the way back to you know like early European like cave art, and he's there. Like this is something that it's it seems to be kind of part of the natural world. Like it's a representation of the natural world. Like it's the daemon of the natural world, and it doesn't surprise me that it kind of like it manages to exist and kind of bridge the gap between whatever it is and wherever it comes from and the human imagination through our stories, through our creativity. And folklore is almost the perfect vehicle for that. There's a
Mm.
quote I use in the book, which I'm going to murder now, but it's by a guy called John Moriarty. So he's this wonderful Irish writer and philosopher, and like he spoke to how kind of like the rational kind of Cartesian mind, like it it won't be able to comprehend why a certain stone that lies a certain way on a hillside turns into an old woman driving her cow to pasture every 7 years. They won't That'll never happen. It'll never be comprehended. But the folkloric mind, it does. It's the dream mind. Like and the folklore is almost like the dreams of our culture. You know, and he seems to have been haunting our dreams since the beginning.
Mm. Yeah, it's funny as well because I remember I just started reading the book, and of all the weird places for this motif to show up, I don't know if you've ever seen the sort of crime drama sort of thing, I suppose you'd call it. It's kind of like Cozy Crime, McDonald and Dodds. In the final
No,
episode of the
yeah,
most recent series, so it's like they're solving crimes in Bath.
yeah.
It had the whole thing where somebody had a map to where Robert Johnson, the exact crossroads that he met
Oh
the
wow,
devil.
yeah,
And then they're
yeah,
all kind of killing each other over who wants to get their hands on this map.
yeah.
And like they start seeing this like dark figure, and I'm like, oh my God, of all the weird places for the dark man to
I'll have
show
to
up.
check that out. That's really cool. Yeah,
Yeah, it's like a whole
yeah,
episode given over to it. And they kind
yeah.
of almost ran with that
Mm,
idea that actually this figure is real rather than it just being
mm, mm,
part of a story. I just thought that was really funny. And I
yeah.
kind of think what you're saying about this like locus of creativity being important. It's like,
Mm.
oh, is this how we fight back against AI, do you think?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I really do. Like like that. There's a certain type of like sterility with creativity that has no soul in it. And I know that sounds like a really, I mean, I'm cringing myself even after saying that, you know, um, but do you know what I mean? Like when there's nothing behind it, because like art, in whatever form it takes, comes from a well inside us that we don't really have like a rational understanding of the need to get it out. Like we don't really what I why do you paint? Why enjoy it? Or I need to, I have to. There's a compulsion behind it that is very hard to nail down why. And equally we have kind of the so much folklore around, you know, inspiration being driven by the fairy world, when like the great harps and airs being, the the work of interaction with fairies, you know. And I think that there's something to that, you know, that there's something to those ideas in terms of it. Perhaps it is tapping into something external that we may present as being the best vehicle for it in some shape or form. But yeah, it's a bit of a rant there about AI art, but like I do I do think there is something to that, you know. Like I see AI art and I go like that's cool, yeah, not bad. Or like, you know, it's got that. Someone was saying, I can't remember where I saw this now, but somebody had a joke along the lines of like being able to spot AI art is basically very similar to how people used to spot changelings. They're like just slightly off. It's like those fingers are too long, you know, or there's an extra finger where there shouldn't be, you know, it's like something like that. But it, I do think there's a differentiation where you can see like excellence in execution versus having a soul, you know. And I would almost put like a lot of like, you know, really deconstructionist modern art in that vein as well, you know, like it doesn't speak to me, you know, it seems like deconstructed to having no life or essence in it. So, um, anyway, so that's another conversation, you know. But yeah,
Cool. I know what, just to kind of get things away from AI rant, because if I start, that'll be the end of it. Um, when I knew I was going to be talking to you, I thought, oh well, I'll go and have a look at Northumbrian folklore and I'll see if
mm,
we've got anything. And we've got, I don't know, it's quite like child friendly in a way, in the sense that we've got like dragons and sort
yeah,
of wizards even, although one of them might or may not be Merlin. And we've got obviously reavers and fairies and whatnot. And we've got the occasional mention of the devil or someone who may be the devil in some of the
yeah,
confessions. But apart from that, we don't really have that sort of figure who kind of forces somebody to think of something differently, shall we say.
right,
So are there certain areas that you found where you get like little, apart from like I know you mentioned Scotland, like clusters where tales seem more
mm,
prevalent,
mm.
or is it the kind of thing where we just haven't looked hard enough?
Um, that's a fabulous question. I'm not sure I can answer it, but I would say the next best stop is the witchcraft cases. You know, like I had I found one here where I live down in East Sussex, and like really irritatingly, I had the book and like I had it for ages, but you know, you just I don't know about you, but I've got an awful book queue like that I keep adding to, but continually stresses me out. You know, but I had this book called Rye Spirits, and um it's about the witch trial in this part of East Sussex, and they're halfway through. After I finished my book, it was mentioned to me by a person. Have you read this book? You know, there's a case in the. I opened it up, and absolutely, he was absolutely correct. This woman who had they think malaria, right? Started having hallucinations, um, seeing spirits and communicating with the spirits, not knowing what to do. She consulted a local cunning woman who was kind of helping her work her way through it and also going to heal her from the kind of the recurring bouts of malaria. Um, and in one passage, she talks about being out in the fields, and her one of the spirits who's contacting her points to a hedge to get her attention towards this hedge. And beyond the hedge, she sees a strikingly beautiful woman in a green dress. And beside her is a man dressed all in black. And she asks, well, who's that woman? She says, she's the queen of the fairies, the queen of Elfheim. And if you take a knee to her, you know, she'll grant you kind of whatever, like a life of ease. Um, they don't say who the man in black is, but we know who the man in black, you know. But interestingly, again, alongside fairies, you know, and the Queen of Elfheim in particular. So, um, that's you know, kind of 15 miles from me. So I would say that's the other place to look is look at the local witch trials, You know, I mean, in Ireland that we don't have a particularly voluminous amount of kind of witch trial confessions. It wasn't as much of a thing in Ireland. What we do have is the Dukas folkloric collection, the school's collection. And this is where I kind of started searching for the term, you know, on far Darka or on far Dove, and just finding bits and bobs all the time, and some of it being, just that kind of diabolical figure of like someone's riding a cart back home at night, and this dark figure just appears on in the seat beside them, and produces like a ball of fire from under their jacket, and it was the fire dove, you know, um, and that might be it. That might literally be the story, right? But again, it's telling me like of okay, well, we've got the dark appearance, we've got an interrupted journey, so there's those bits where you can start to identify and piece out where the figure might be. But so I would be surprised if you don't find any trace of him there. I mean, it's obviously quite possible, but I think those kind of elements of the pattern are kind of worth looking for. There's just motifs that may kind of throw up something. But as you said, like it's also in modern stories, like Fargo, the TV show. I don't know if you've watched that series one of Fargo. There's a character called Lorne Malvo in it, who I speak to a little bit in the book. Who strikes me as a very good, modern rendering of the motif of the current. And he has do you get in trouble for spoilers? You're not going to get like people emailing you going, I was watching Fargo and that Irish guy ruined it for me.
You should be all right.
Yeah. All right. Like if you're watching Fargo now, please just, skip ahead, but essentially he's having this dynamic. Lorne Malvo is this assassin, right? Just kind of comes into town. And again, it starts off with this interrupted journey, that kind of, which is also kind of a motif for that kind of like randomness, right? It's that kind of, just weird things that happen. But he comes into town, and there's a guy there who's cuts quite a pathetic figure. I think it's Victor Nygaard is his name, and he's just totally downtrodden. He's detested by his wife. He even gets kind of beaten up by his school bully, and he's like in his mid-40s, just like awful kind of scenario. He randomly ends up sitting beside Lorne Malvo in A&E, and they have this exchange, and he mentions that, yeah, my school bully did this to me, and it's just, sometimes I wish that guy would just die, and he opens that conversation, but Lorne Malvo is like, well, is that what you want? Do you just say the word? And it starts this dynamic of like, this. I was like watching this, going, this is a fairy tale. There is an exchange, there is a deal being struck, and he gets everything he wants. Like he gets away, he literally gets away with murder. This pathetic man becomes this kind of leader in the town. He's at a very successful business, a beautiful wife who adores him. He gets everything, right? But he pushes it too far when he tries to kind of engage with the devil again, with Lorne Malvo again, and he destroys everything for himself. Now, at the end, he's trying to run it because it's in Wisconsin, where there's really kind of like terribly cold parts of America, and he's like running across a lake, stops, and this is his demise, and the ice cracks and he sinks down, and again, it's like he literally sinks into the underworld. He goes straight down, into the kind of the realm of the dark man, but Lorne Malvo changes identity several times. He changes, his appearance, his name. and but they're also the writers had some fun with it. They give some very big clues that is a little bit more to it than this, but um, I, like that's a wonderful version. I thought of a rendering of the character and its motifs.
It's funny when you say that because I just suddenly thought of the Clint Eastwood character in Pale Rider because obviously he sort of like turns up in town and it's
Mm,
only really through his, I won't say intervention, but he kind of inspires one of the townsfolk to actually stand up to
hmm
the sort of the family who are ruining the town and everything, and they have the big standoff, and the guy then becomes the hero that he probably always should have been,
hmm
but wasn't until this character came along and sort of like lit the blue touch paper and retired
Yeah.
kind of thing. So it's interesting to see that sort of aspect. And it was also when you mentioned the story about the Queen of Elfhame sort of next to this
hmm
man in black, because I suddenly thought of Thomas the Rhymer, because he falls
Yes.
asleep under
Yeah.
a tree
Yeah.
and it's obviously the Queen he meets. And
Mm,
the idea of him having to stay silent about what's happened while he's there, and then he gets the gift of prophecy when he leaves, it almost feels like there are some suggestions that he can't say what's happened because her husband doesn't know that he's been there. Who's
hmm
to say her husband in that story isn't actually the Dark Man? So the
Yeah.
initiation has come at the Queen's hands.
hmm
Um, but yeah, that makes me look at that story in a completely different light now.
Mm, cool.
Because it is quite interesting how these encounters sort of bridge this gap between what we sort of think of as folklore
Mm,
and in the past.
yeah.
There's a lot of people always think of folklore as just being like this 19th century thing, and it's like, no, no. There's also like people's lived experience
Mm,
now. So do you think that something like the Dark Man, because he appears through all these stories right into pop
mhm.
culture and so on, demonstrates that folklore is actually just a continuum that we're part of?
Yes. Yeah, I do. Yeah. And and I know that's a bitter pill for a lot of people to take, you know. But I think we're talking about a very different understanding of the world, you know. And it's part of the reason why the book is structured the way it is, you know, to build the, that bridge between our kind of the Irish mythology, the broader spectrum of folklore referring to this figure, then with that kind of specific links to the confessions of Scottish witches, and in particular Isabel Gowdy, and then reflecting that in the modern, the modern experience, contemporary uh, experiencers and what have you, like like and it's really hard to kind of not, well, I found it anyway, really hard not to be just amazed by the specific connections, like within the book I talk about kind of three aspects in Irish mythology where a figure, uh, quote unquote evil spirits, two quite specifically referred to with black appellation, as Don Dove, or there's the Black Magician of the Men of God, or the Dark Man of the She, um, and Don Dove, who is the Lord of the Dead. Um, Incidentally, I found out as well there's several names for kind of Tir na Nog, and one of them is like uh Chalk and Dun. So it's like Don's house, the house of Don. But in the mythology that I've worked through, he's kind of referred to as Lord of the Dead, right? But he does have that function as well. But anyway, I've gone off on a tangent, not talking about what I meant to focus on, which was um uh, this theme of fairy woman being transformed into a deer in order to trick the heroes, the Fianna specifically. And that happens kind of twice in the collection of stories around the Fianna. So most notably with um, Fionn McCool and his fairy wife Siva, who is turned into a deer by this dark magician of the men of God referring to Tuatha De Danann, or the black magician of the black dark druid of the She. she being the fairies. So we have these kind of crossover with these otherworldly forces that he represents, but the Tua in particular, that kind of ties into, the Irish pantheon. Um, so Fionn is sees this deer when he's out hunting. The deer is behaving in a way that's strange. His dogs won't attack the deer. Again, a strange thing. So he brings the deer back into his fort, the Dún of Allen. That night, a beautiful woman enters his chambers, and after a short exchange, explains that she's being pursued by this this dark magician who wants to wed her, and she doesn't want to marry him, and as such sought out Fionn's protection from him, because the fort and proximity to Fionn breaks this black magician's spell. She's strikingly beautiful, and then basically they're inseparable from that moment on, and they become a couple. Now, as part of his duties, he has to defend Ireland from invading forces, and there's an attack of Vikings. He goes off to defend Ireland, and while he's away, she's waiting for him, and then she sees him approach the fort by himself, and runs out of the protected boundaries of the fort to greet him, only for it to transform, shapeshift into the black magician of the men of God, who strikes her on the head with the hazel wand, turns her back into this deer, and she's never seen again. Now, the similar story is around, again in with the Fianna, where the heroes, Culture MacRonan, one of the Fianna, is tricked into hunting a deer, and it's actually a fairy woman called Lady Mal in the form of this deer, and he's running after her, and the fairy leads him purposely to the land of the dead, to the fort of Dun, kind of where an interaction takes place. So we've got two versions of this story where there's this bait and switch with a fairy woman and a deer, shape shifting, with a protagonist with a dark appellation on appearance, and then there's another poem called Fafland from the Metrical Dinchakas, which recounts a similar type story. And then in the Confessions of Isabel Gowdy, she describes the devil turning up, Black John, she refers to him as a meckle great rock man, so this kind of big rough man who sometimes would appear in the shape of sometimes he would appear with booties on, sometimes he appear with hooves, or they would be split like a deer, and sometimes he would appear in the form of a ray, which is an archaic Scotch word for a roe deer. So we have this inversion of the story, with the kind of the gender roles reversed, and the shape shifting reversed. But there's a great researcher called Joshua Cutchin. He talks about this in these like fairy type stories, that this inversion is representation. So it kind of is encapsulated within the motif. So I found that an astonishing link, of a very, very specific detail, and as individually, without the kind of like the dynamic that we described, the dark appellation, the kind of the magic involved, these otherworldly beings, and the specific shapeshifting into a deer. In isolation, these things may be dismissed, but I think when you've got these kind of like stacked amount of the same ideas and motifs, I think there's something there. That consistency just jumped out at me.
Mm. So obviously you talk about your own experience in the book as well, and you've probably already slightly answered this question, but how would someone know if they'd met the Dark Man already? Because I kind of get the feeling he's not the
Yeah.
kind of chap who'll just sit next to you on the bus.
Yeah, totally. I think the real kind of impactful the impactful thing that you'd notice is the trauma you experience. Because it is a terrifying thing, and there's no getting around that. That there is a real, like, a gut punch in terms of what people tend to experience. Not everyone, but like that seems to be the consistent thing, you know, because all of a sudden people are seeing you know a 12-foot high, um like impossibly black figure, speaking to them or materializing in their room. Sometimes it appears in a very kind of like um archaic kind of clothing, but again, jet black. Um the composite being, that's a recurrent theme. It's sometimes it appears exactly as you would imagine a 17th century devil would appear. You
Mm,
know, so like, and I think there's something to do with our imagination in that sense. Of like, um, there's a relationship between the observer and the observed. You
hmm
know, I think happening there, but I think it's it's a gut punch. It's striking. You would not be, did that just happen, kind of thing. Yeah, I think that's what people would take away from it.
yeah. So, do you think people, and obviously you've interviewed people in the book who were quite happy to talk about their experiences, but do you think some people might be put off from describing their experiences,
Oh yeah, definitely.
obviously due to the links with the devil, but just in
Yeah,
general, it's like a hard thing to put into words?
yeah. I think it really is. And that's kind of one of the reasons I kind of wrote the book, was to put something out there that people might be able to kind of identify with.
Hmm
And go, "Oh, it's not just me." And I certainly have lots of people who've written to me saying that and sharing their experiences. Talking about kind of the relief they felt. Going like, it isn't just me. This is a thing. I mean, obviously, there's lots of people who will think, this is absurdity, but it's that's just kind of goes to the territory. But the principal thing, and it kind of comes down to that kind of the disruptor force, is that um it's an ontological shock. Like we live in circling back to that kind of AI, that sterile world, where, whether we like it or not, the dominant worldview, Western worldview, I should really say, is, comes from a Cartesian mindset, Cartesian understanding of the world. And then, things like this shouldn't exist. People shouldn't have those experiences, yet they consistently do, you know. Um, and people who have those experiences, if you were in another part of the world, you know, would be going, well, you guys are obviously seeing the other world. You're brushing up against the other world. There's a language for it. There's a spiritual technology for it. You know, and we, broadly speaking, have lost that language for it. Like, yeah. But I think we're in the process of rediscovering it.
hmm
You know, um,
Yeah, when you said spiritual technology, I just thought, please don't let the tech bros find that as well, because they've ruined everything else. Oh, um, and this is probably a weird question because I think there's a tendency to think in quite binary terms
mm,
with a lot of things in the world.
yeah, yeah,
And I suppose around a lot of these stories, there's an idea of good and evil or
yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
So does he have an opposite number in some kind of benevolent figure, or is that completely the role? Is he just kind of the opposite of the default,
Mm.
if that makes sense?
Um, it does, and this, I think I've got kind of two reflections on that question. So the first one would be, if we look at, say, the story I mentioned earlier about kind of Fionn, the Dark Man, and Saiva. Um, so Fionn means white or fair haired, right? So it's kind of automatically putting him in a binary against
Mm.
the Dark Man, right? Equally, the fact that, you know Saiv wishes to wed Fionn, it speaks to his potency in part, because she's a royal, Like she is the daughter of a god. So it's like she's very, very briefly in the mythology, but she's a serious figure. Um, but the Dark Man doesn't like they're on an equal footing to a degree in that tale. So there is that kind of play on kind of opposite, but in the wider sense of what you're talking about, of like, is there a kind of a quote unquote good guy? Um, Not that I see. And I think a lot of that is because it's been subsumed. Our folklore in Britain and Ireland has been subsumed into Christianity,
Mm.
to some degree. Um, where I think there's an interesting area to look at is what we find with some of these stories is there's a there's a there's a deliberate play on appearance versus name, you know. So like Gwyn ap Nude, like jet black, white face, right? So or the puka fairy we talk about, sometimes it's black, sometimes it's white, shape shifts, that kind of stuff, right? So it's an adjacent kind of figure. Um, Even like Lucifer, he's like the the dark shining one, the light bringer, the dark figure that brings the light. So you're getting into kind of um like almost these figures, these stories hinting at this idea of kind of a non-dualism,
Mm.
right? So I think that's where you get to with him, really, that and it's very easy to get kind of sink into kind of the evil and good versus evil and all that kind of stuff because we live in this type of world, that it's kind of our day to day. But ultimately, I think that's what this figure is kind of hinting at, like that in the world beyond this one, you know, um, that it's non-dualistic,
Hmm.
which is what I think that the kind of the composite being is reflecting too. I think it's indicating that.
Yeah. I quite like the idea that he's also disrupting binaries as well. I'm all for
Mm.
that. Um, One thing I was wondering is how does he choose who to appear to, or is that something that
Mm.
you just cannot possibly know because that's like trying to work out the
Yeah.
mind of God?
Well, I mean, this is it, and there seems to be a couple of things, but um, like what I've noticed, what people have said as well is it may be a hereditary thing. There's this kind of concept. I talk about kind of fire in the blood, that idea of like that, um, in deep antiquity, some of your ancestors might have been up to something, and you carry that in through your familial lines. That seems to be an aspect of things. Um, it's a very contentious idea, that area, because the people like to say, well, anybody can be like a witch. Um, but I think it's not up to them necessarily. If we're talking about initiation from a spirit side, um, it's it's six of one and half a dozen of the other. You know, like because seemingly there's people who just randomly, you know, have hugely profound experiences. Who have had zero interest in that kind of world beforehand. As far as they know, in their familiar line, there's nothing. You know, so this is where I think it's part of this is just the propagation of that type of um initiation, that kind of ignition of of inspiration and fire, mystical fire in the blood. That just might be it. You know, um, but that's yeah. There's another bit as well where there is those he appears to, and then there's those who seek him out.
Mm,
So there is kind of that as well.
yeah, I kind of see him as almost like the supreme headhunter in a way.
Yeah, yeah. I like that. Yeah.
So hopefully not literally.
Yeah.
Um, obviously I'll put a review of the
Hmm.
book properly on the end of the episode for anyone who's interested. But where can people find you if they want to find out more? Or are you open to people telling you about their encounters, like just like messages off randoms on social media, or would you rather that they sort of didn't?
Such a double-edged sword question, that one.
Sorry.
I'm on Instagram. I kind of that's the only kind of social media presence I have. Just our darragmason.com is my website. And those are the main places. I've a podcast called Spirit Box as well, you know. And yeah, I'm interested in hearing people's accounts, but if I don't necessarily get back to people, it's because I'm actually really bad at social media. Like I'm kind of yeah, I'm a grumpy middle-aged man. I don't be looking at social media. This is
You sometimes look at social media and think, would I miss this? Probably not.
it's like what the hell's got what? Yep, that's yeah. I just I don't really go on it that much, you know. Like there's no interesting story behind that. I just
You've got stuff to do, man.
got
That's the
stuff to do. Yeah, this is it. Yeah.
Oh, well, it's been absolutely lovely talking to you. And as I say, it's a really interesting book, and I think it's quite a timely book. As I say, when I'm now like, oh my God, the Dark Man's in crime thrillers on Channel
Mm,
5. I
mm.
think that's sort of, you think, what next is he going to be in EastEnders? That will be amazing.
That would be incredible. Yeah, yeah. Um, well, no, and thank you for inviting me. It's been a real pleasure to be here, and I'm a big fan of your show. So it's awesome to be on your show.
Glad to hear it. And obviously, I'll put links. I always point downward just in case anyone's watching on YouTube. Like people know where the show notes are.
Yeah.
But I'll put links because sometimes it's just nicer to click on things
Yeah.
rather than type them out.
Mm.
So that's all good. But yeah, it's been lovely talking to you.
Thank you.
Well, hello there. I just wanted to jump on, and also just like how cool is my t-shirt. I just wanted to quickly jump on and do a book review of this Song of the Dark Man by Darragh Mason. I've just had him on the podcast talking about it, but I wanted to give a quick little review because I quite like doing these as reels. Now, this is a really interesting book because he talks about the concept of the Dark Man, which in some places you might think of as being the devil. So think of that story of Robert Johnson going to the Crossroads, meeting a figure who tunes his guitar, and then he goes on to have immense success afterwards. That kind of character is what we're talking about. He also appears in tales as sort of the Lord of the Fairies, sometimes the Lord of the Dead, that kind of figure. And what's really interesting is Dara's pulled together sort of different examples from folklore and mythology, particularly from Ireland, where this figure is really prominent, and then also finds examples from the historical record, notably from the Scottish witch trials, and then also pulls together experiences people have had in the contemporary era with this kind of, I don't want to say archetype because that, I think, turns the Dark Man into something that's a little bit too intellectualized, but that particular concept figure, whatever you want to call the Dark Man. So it's really interesting in the approach. And when I was reading it, I was like, I can't think of another book that I've read that has taken this sort of approach, shall we say, of looking at something in both the ancient past, in more the near past, as it were, and then also in the now. And it just does demonstrate that folklore isn't just a thing that happened in the 19th century or whenever in the past. It is something that we are all still part of even now today. I think that's something that's really important to bear in mind. And it's a really interesting book, really well written. Dara's got a really lovely lyrical style, so it's beautiful to read. And he's got some really interesting examples, both from folklore and history. But then when you get to the initiation section, it is really fascinating to think, God, these stories actually happen to people. Like, this is actual experience here. So it is really worth your time. If you are interested in any of these areas, like the devil, folklore, stuff like that, definitely give it a go. And if you're interested as well in things like the witch trials, or indeed in Irish mythology and Irish folklore, again, definitely give it a go. But if you do give it a go, let me know what you think, and enjoy. Well, thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, feel free to leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts, because that helps other people find the show too. It also takes between 4 and 6 hours to research, write, record and edit these episodes, so if you want to help support my time in doing that, then you can buy me a coffee. Or you can join the Fabulous Folklore family on Patreon and enjoy extra benefits, including exclusive episodes and articles and even illustrated talks. All the links you need are below, and thanks in advance.